It is the summer of 2008, and I am sitting in the office of a psychologist. And it's actually my second visit to her office. I'm there to get the results of the test that I took the first time that I went to her office. And the psychologist is standing behind her desk, and she's shuffling through papers, but she's not talking to me. And her office is very quiet, and the silence is getting a little bit awkward, which of course I assume is like she's testing me or something. So I just try to remain calm, and I sit there and I look around her office, and her office is very neat and uncluttered, which I like because it reminds me of my college room, which anytime that I needed to take a test or study, the first thing I would do is I would clean up my room. I'd put everything away, I'd dust, I'd make the bed, put the laundry away, and then I could sit at my desk and concentrate. But I can't sit still in her office because the seat that I'm in is not very comfortable, and because it's made of leather, every time I shift my weight, it kind of sounds like I'm farting. And that reminds me of one of my roommates who had a really bad farting problem, and he was so bad we made him go see a doctor, which makes me wonder, is a psychologist a doctor? I suppose she is, but she can't prescribe drugs, which is just as well because I don't really believe in drugs. I mean, I smoked pot once, but it really did nothing for me, so I just pretended that I was stoned, which is easy to do when your entire audience is stoned. And at one point, I actually thought that I could be a good actor, so I joined the drama club, but after the first performance, my baseball coach came up to me and he said, "It's a good thing you can hit a curveball because your acting sucks." And my acting did suck because something about memorizing lines and pretending that I'm someone else, I just couldn't do it, like walking and chewing gum at the same time, which is kind of crazy because every time I played baseball, I chewed gum and it had no effect on me. I was the catcher on my baseball team, and that's how I got the nickname Winnie, because apparently when I had all my catcher's gear on, I looked like Winnie the Pooh, which is just as well because I really like Winnie the Pooh. So, somewhere in there, the doctor told me that I tested positive for ADD. And I suppose I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was intrigued, and I had a lot of questions, so I started asking questions. I said, is it unusual for someone to develop ADD later in life? I mean, I'm 40 years old. I thought it was a kid thing. And frankly, isn't it a learning disorder? Because on paper, I don't really look like someone who has a learning disorder. I mean, shit, I went to Harvard. I studied Latin for 7 years. And she looks at me funny, almost like she didn't understand the questions, and she says, ADD's not like a cold. You don't catch it. You've had it your whole life, I promise you. And not just some borderline case. I mean, you've got a full-blown raging case of ADD. And she said this last part as if she was telling me that I had herpes. But she could tell that I was a little distressed, so she used all of her medical training and she went to the bookshelf and she got a paperback and she handed it to me and she said, "Here, read this. I think you'll find it very interesting, and pay attention especially to the parts about coping mechanisms." So I did. I read it, and it was very interesting, but it was also really freaky because I recognized myself on all of the pages of that book. And apparently for the first 40 years of my life, I wasn't just like the grand wizard of coping mechanisms. I was like Dumbledore. And my most powerful coping mechanism was apparently this thing called hyperfocus. And it's almost counterintuitive to think that somebody who has ADD could do anything called hyperfocus. But it is a survival skill. And it gives you the freakish ability to concentrate on just one thing and block everything else out, like tunnel vision for your brain. So obviously, this was a good skill to have in school and for things like test taking. And it even came in handy for baseball because I really could hit a curveball. And it's because I could see it coming. I mean, literally block out everything except the stitches on the ball as it left the pitcher's hand. Now, it wasn't until after school that I realized the downside of hyperfocus. You see, it's not the best skill to have when you're in a relationship. Because, well, you have the freakish ability to block everything out, like people, or emotions, or conversations. So, for example, I might be sitting in the room with my wife, and I remember that I need to go do something in the other room, so of course I get up and I leave the room, not realizing, of course, that just before I got up to leave the room, she asked me a very, very important question. Apparently, this was not a rare occurrence, or so I'm told by both of my ex-wives. So now I take Adderall, I have for 7 years, and I suppose it does good. But really, the downside for me is that the net effect is that I can no longer block things out. So I'm just learning to deal with distractions, which is funny because most normal people do that as they're growing up, which I guess you could say I'm a 48-year-old who's still growing up. Which optimistically, the way I look at it is in a couple, maybe 20 more years, I'll be ready to start dating again. But the downside, of course, is that really, hyperfocus was my superpower. And it seems that today that my only superpowers are my neuroses. Because, for example, I don't really enjoy going to movies anymore because I can tell you exactly how many people are eating popcorn in that theater. And at home, I can't sit and read a book if the kid next door wants to bounce his basketball. And if you're at work with me in a meeting and you start clicking your pen, I'm going to stab you in the eye. So life after ADD is a little bit upside down, honestly. It's messy, it's not planned out, and sometimes it's a little scary. And when life is throwing shit at my head, which it does normally, I kind of wish I could still see the stitches on that curveball. Thank you.